So I've been driving for Lyft for over 3 years now, and I've driven over 8,500 passengers. And I never start talking about Jesus Christ to anybody, but there are a lot of Christians that I do give right to that want to have a conversation about Jesus. And I love talking about Jesus. Right? So I tell them I'm Christian, and there's a lot of things we agree, but I don't really go into details about what I believe in because I don't want to start a debate, right? I usually just kind of agree. But, however, I do ask one question. Majority of the Christians that I give right to and people that I meet, I ask them this question: are you a sinner or are you a saint? You can't be both. You can't say, because a lot of people say, well, I'm a sinner, but because of Jesus, I think he sees me as a saint. And they say, well, that's a safe answer, right? But you can't be both, because sinner means you have missed the mark. You're not perfect. And saint means you're perfect. So you can't be both. Right? Because if you think you're both, which majority of Christians believe, then, that's why I call Christians, a lot of them are bipolar. One time they're very happy, other time they're really depressed, because they have this idea we're sinful, we're sinners, and we're saints at the same time, which is impossible. Right? So, what I realized then is that even as people who follow Jesus Christ, we are obsessed with sin. I talked about this before. If there's one doctrine that all Christians agree upon, and I'm talking about doctrine, I'm not talking about, hey, Jesus Christ is Lord. That's all Christians believe that, yeah. But when it comes to Protestants and Catholics, we could all agree on one thing. We're all sinners. I'm a sinner, you're a sinner, we're sinners. Wouldn't you like to be a sinner too? Right? Sin seems to be the major thing that draws people to the church, but not to be healed, though, to somehow battle with it, to go into war with sin. But I'm here to tell you, sin is not the problem. Sin is not the problem. We shouldn't even talk about sin. That's my opinion, because we have Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ changed everything. It's not about sin. It's about something else. It is about something else, but it's not sin. I'll get to that. I want to go over Galatians chapter 5 real quickly, all right? Because what Jesus did is he freed us. People think he has freed us from sin, but what he really did was he freed us from the law. Because Paul talks about that all the time in the New Testament, is that law was brought in so that we could get closer to God in the Old Testament. This is the way of the Lord, and he has given us rules. But when the law came into the world, sin did not decrease, it actually increased. Right? That's what Paul says. And I agree with that. Right? The more you know about what not to do are the things that we actually keep on doing. That's the frustration of the law. And that somehow that frustration leads us to something else, which is a savior, which everybody 2,000 years ago was waiting for, a Messiah, because the law just couldn't cut it. It increased sin. It's the way of Jesus Christ. So Paul says when Jesus came into the world, then what happens to the law? The law reveals sin. It doesn't reveal holiness, it reveals sin. So when you get rid of the law, it doesn't reveal sin anymore. Right? Because that's what Paul says. When Christ and salvation and the Spirit came into the world, the law becomes obsolete. So we got to get that mindset away from us. So Paul starts in Galatians 5, stand firm, therefore, in the liberty with which Christ has made us free. Free from what? There's another question I asked a lot of, free from what? He didn't free us from sin. He can't, because we're still humans. If there's any kind of law in the world, we're going to break some of them. And Jesus said, if you break the least of the law, you have broken all of the law. So you can't compare like some people do. Christians, since we focus on sin so much, that we say, well, certain sin is less than the others, right? So try to get rid of the bigger sins in your life and deal with the lesser sin later on, or something like that. But Jesus said, if you've broken the least of the law, you have broken all of the law. So what are you going to do? Everyone are guilty. And that's what all churches agree upon, is that everyone is guilty. But even though we're guilty, we're saved. Well, what happens when you sin again? Well, you have to ask God for forgiveness. And it goes on and on and on. right? So are you really being healed? Are you really walking away from sin? You're not. I give ride to passengers who are Christians, and they ask me questions. I mean, we get into. I never start talking about Jesus, but when the questions are asked, then I have a conversation. And few of the conversation I had was, they tell me about sin, and as Christians, we're forgiven, and God helps us with our sin. And all I have to say is, well, how's that working out for you? Are you sinning less than before? And she said, well, if I really work at it, they say, as when I work at it, then yeah, I sin less. But sometimes I go into relapse. See, that's the problem. It gets so frustrating to a point where many Christians have actually said there is no difference when it comes to sin, because we're all sinners. Whether you believe in Jesus or not believe in Jesus, we're all the same. We sin all the time. So therefore, the only difference is if you have faith in Jesus Christ, if you go to church, that is, then you're saved. But the way we act, the way we do things, there is no difference between someone that has salvation, that's a Christian, and someone who is not a Christian. Well, that's the conclusion you have to come to, because we're not free from sin. If Christ has come to save us or free us from sin, then it's not working, because everybody still sins. And that's something that every Christians agree upon. We're all sinners. We're all sinners. But what Paul tells us is, stand firm, therefore, in the liberty with which Christ has set us free from, not from sin. He set us free from the law, right? And he says, and be not harnessed again under the yoke of servitude, the yoke of slavery. And so he calls the law the yoke of slavery, because it enslaves you to act or do things in a certain way that is impossible to follow. The more we try, the more we don't do. Right? That's the frustration. So why do we keep going with this? Why do we keep going at a church saying, you're a sinner, you're sin? We're obsessed with sin. We talk about sin all the time. I think we just need to stop. If we're going to talk about Jesus Christ, he has set us free from the way of the law, which is the yoke of slavery. We got to walk away from that so that we could resurrect to another. That is the Spirit of Jesus Christ. Right? So he goes on in verse 6 in chapter 5. It says, For in Christ Jesus, neither is circumcision anything, nor uncircumcision anything, but faith is which is accomplished by love. It's not obeying the written code or not obeying it that matters, but faith that you believe in what Christ has done, which is accomplished by love. Faith is accomplished by love. Right? So he goes on verse 13, for my brethren, you have been called to liberty. Only do not use your liberty for an occasion to the things of the flesh, but by love serve one another. So the opposite of serving each other in love, or being led by the Spirit to live a spiritual life, is not sin, it's the flesh. Focusing on the flesh. That's what he says in verse 13. And I think that's what we should be talking about. Not sin. Once again, for my brothers, you have been called to liberty, only do not use your liberty for an occasion to the things of the flesh. Which is very interesting. I'll give you this example, and hopefully this makes sense. All right. So when I talk to people about what my belief, my doctrine, and I say, I don't care about sin. Right? There's no such thing as right and wrong when it comes to written code. And of course, majority of Christians thinking about the law and sin and righteousness in that matter. Right? This is what everybody says. I said good 90%. Because most of the time I talk to guys that talk about Jesus with me. I say, I don't believe we shouldn't even think like what is right and wrong. You should do whatever you want. Do whatever you want. Have faith. Do whatever you want. Right? So their response is this. If a man is single, they say, oh, does that mean I could have sex before I'm married? I get that a lot. Or if the man is married, he asks, oh, does that mean I could commit adultery? Right? So my answer, sometimes it's, well, if you want to, do whatever you want, right? But then I follow that with, but why would you want to, right? Isn't it funny when I point out that we have been set free, live your life as a person of freedom, right? But do not, as it says, use your liberty for an occasion to the things of the flesh. They immediately ask the question, does that mean I could do this in the flesh? Right? Because they go back to the law. Because Christian law is you can't have sex before marriage. Well, majority of Christians that I met, you can't have sex before marriage, or you can't commit adultery. But those are things of the flesh. Right? So there is no understanding between what I want to, the point that I want to make, and the conversation that I'm having with somebody who is still in the flesh. You gotta obey the law. I said, but you've been set free from the law. So when you're set free from the law, and you follow in the steps of the Spirit, you won't even think about, is it okay to commit adultery or have sex before marriage or not? No, those kind of thinking is brought up by the law, and the more you try not to, you will. I mean, because last time I read about that commitment that Christians make, that they're gonna stay pure, as they call it, because if you have sex before marriage, you're not pure. But you want to stay pure for your husband or your wife. They make a commitment. I mean, last time I read, it could be wrong now, but last time I read about it, that more people who make that commitment have sex before marriage, right? Which is really interesting, right? What is the divorce rate within Christian circle? Isn't it about the same? Or maybe even more? Who knows? Right? So it says the opposite of living a life of liberty is not sin, but is us focusing on the flesh. And we know that the law, Christian law, is for the flesh. Right? It's that you gotta keep your body under control. That's what the law is all about. And we just focus so much on that. Right? But on verse 14, he says, for the whole law is fulfilled in one saying, that is, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. We need to be motivated by the Spirit who is love. The whole law is fulfilled in one saying, that is, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So when they ask me, you mean you could have commit adultery? Right? I would say, yeah, I don't think about it in the sense of, I could or cannot have committed adultery. I can't even think like that. I shouldn't. What I say is, I need to love my wife. Right? That's it. I need to love my wife. And then if you follow in that love, I need to have faith that I will do what is right by her and what is right by me and what is right by the Spirit of God. The whole law is fulfilled in one saying, that is, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Right? But if you harm and plunder one another, take heed lest you be consumed one by another. Justice. Let's bring justice, because there's the law. And if somebody does something wrong, there has to be justice. That's the way of the law. That's the way of the flesh. And look what's going on in the world. Everybody is starting to hate one another. We're just building up more dividing walls. We're finding new ways to build dividing walls. Right? First of all, it came out Black Lives Matter. Then it's Blue Lives Matter. Now it's All Lives Matter. And in LA, they put up they wrote down on the street, all Black Lives Matter, and the word all includes blacks who are transgender and LGBT people and things like that. So we're building up more and more walls because we want justice, right? But what we end up doing is we harm and plunder one another and consume one by another. That's what happens when we focus on the flesh. Now, when it comes to When it comes to the government, I could say, well, yeah, they have to make laws that has to deal with the flesh. But when it comes to the church, shouldn't we get rid of the fleshly laws and abide unto keep in step with the Spirit of God? So why are we as Christians continuing to talk about sin all the time? It just boggles my mind. I don't think it helps. I got a street cleaner coming, so I got to move the car, right? But look what he says. All right, I'm going to read and drive a little bit, right? It says, for the flesh craves that which is harmful to the spirit, right? The flesh carves out what is harmful to the spirit. Christians should know that if we focus on the things of the flesh, it is harmful to the way we live our lives in the Spirit of God. Right? So we gotta get rid of that. Right? The spirit and the flesh are in contrary to one another, it says on verse 17. Contrary to one another. You can't teach both, which I think a lot of Christian churches do. We teach both. And that's why we become bipolar. We shouldn't do that. But if you're led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. That's what he says in verse 18. We got to walk away from it. We can't do both. Martin Luther King, his speech, it's been how many years since? We just celebrated that a few days ago. Right? He said he dreamed for a time when we are judged by our character rather than our skin color. Michael Jackson's song said, I'm not going to live my life being a color, that we should work on our character. Well, what's working on a character, right? The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, self-control. Against these things, there's no law, okay? You can't have both. You got to have one or the other. So, opposite of following the Spirit, what stops us from following the Spirit is not sin. So don't think about that. It's our obsession with the flesh. We want justice. We want to fulfill the law. We need to create more laws to bring about justice. And then we end up devouring one another. No, love, joy, peace, goodness, kindness. The Spirit we need to follow. Because against such spiritual blessings or the fruits of the Spirit, there is no law. Make a decision. You can't have both. Please, you can't have both. Following the steps of the Spirit of God. Right? Live your life in freedom and enjoy it in this freedom. Have faith that if you follow the Spirit, He will guide you to that path of righteousness. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. God bless you. All right. Rejoice in the Lord in the freedom that He has set you free. God bless you. I'll see you next time.